Abuela, why are there so many white stones?
Today you'll discover the incredible story of 8-year-old Michael Thompson, whose simple gesture at Arlington National Cemetery touched the heart of an entire nation and reminded us all of the true meaning of respect and sacrifice. Get ready for a moving narrative that will show you how sometimes the smallest actions can have the biggest impact. Before we begin this amazing story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. It was a crisp autumn morning in Arlington, Virginia, when the Thompson family decided to visit one of America's most sacred places. The leaves were turning golden and red, creating a beautiful backdrop against the white marble headstones that stretched endlessly across the rolling hills. 8-year-old Michael walked between his parents, David and Sarah Thompson, his small hand gripping his father's as they approached the tomb of the unknown soldier. David Thompson, a veteran himself who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, had been planning this visit for months. He wanted his son to understand the weight of sacrifice, the meaning of service, and the respect owed to those who gave everything for their country. As they walked along the perfectly manicured pathways, David pointed out the precise rows of white headstones, each one representing a life given in service. "Dad, why are all the stones the same?" Michael asked, his curious 8-year-old mind trying to process the enormity of what he was seeing. "Because in death, son, all soldiers are equal. Rich or poor, famous or unknown, they all served with the same courage," David explained, his voice carrying the weight of personal experience. The morning air was filled with a reverent silence, broken only by the distant sound of footsteps on gravel and the occasional whisper of visitors paying their respects. As they approached the tomb of the unknown soldier, Michael's eyes widened at the sight of the imposing white marble structure. The tomb stood as a monument to all unidentified soldiers who had died in combat, representing the ultimate sacrifice made by those whose names would never be known. Standing guard was Sergeant First Class James Rodriguez, a member of the elite 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, known as the Old Guard. His uniform was immaculate, every crease perfect, every button polished to a mirror shine. His movements were precise and deliberate as he performed the sacred duty that had been carried out continuously, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week since 1937. Michael watched in fascination as the guard executed his 21-step walk across the black mat, turned, faced the tomb for 21 seconds, then turned again and walked back. The precision was mesmerizing. Each step measured exactly 24 inches, each movement a testament to discipline and respect. As the Thompson family stood among the growing crowd of visitors, Michael's attention became completely focused on Sergeant Rodriguez. The 8-year-old had never seen anything like this before. The absolute precision, the unwavering dedication, the silent communication of respect that seemed to emanate from every movement the guard made. "How long does he do that, Dad?" Michael whispered, tugging on his father's jacket. "Every guard walks for exactly 1 hour, son. Then another guard comes to relieve him. This has been going on for over 80 years, through rain, snow, hurricanes, and even during the attacks on September 11th, David explained, his voice filled with admiration. Sarah Thompson watched her son's face as he absorbed this information. She could see something changing in his expression, a dawning understanding of the gravity of what they were witnessing. Michael had always been a thoughtful child, but this was different. This was the moment when abstract concepts like duty, honor, and sacrifice began to take concrete form in his young mind. The crowd around them was diverse. Tourists from around the world, school groups, veterans like David, and families teaching their children about American history. Everyone maintained the respectful silence that the sacred space demanded. Signs posted around the area reminded visitors to remain quiet and remove their hats, but most people seemed to understand instinctively that this was a place where reverence was required. Sergeant Rodriguez continued his measured walk, his face a mask of concentration and respect. Behind his stoic expression, James was thinking about his own journey to this moment. Growing up in San Antonio, Texas, he had dreamed of serving his country since he was Michael's age. His grandfather had served in World War II, his father in Vietnam, and James had felt the call to continue that legacy of service. The selection process to become a tomb guard was grueling. Out of hundreds of applicants, only a select few were chosen each year. The physical requirements were demanding. Guards had to be between 5 feet 10 inches and 6 feet 4 inches tall, with a waist size no larger than 30 inches. But the physical standards were just the beginning. The real test was mental and emotional. Guards underwent months of intensive training, memorizing detailed information about Arlington National Cemetery and the tomb of the unknown soldier. They had to learn the history of every major battle, every significant military campaign, and be able to answer any question a visitor might ask. They studied the layout of the cemetery until they could navigate it blindfolded, learned the location of every notable grave, and understood the significance of every monument. But perhaps most importantly, they had to internalize the weight of their responsibility. They weren't just performing a ceremony, they were standing guard over the remains of unknown soldiers, men who had died far from home, whose families never knew what happened to them, whose sacrifices might otherwise be forgotten. As Michael continued to watch, he noticed something that the adults around him seemed to miss. Every time Sergeant Rodriguez turned to face the tomb, his eyes would briefly close, and his lips would move almost imperceptibly. Michael was too young to understand that the guard was saying a silent prayer, offering a moment of personal respect to the unknown soldiers lying beneath the marble. The autumn sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the memorial plaza. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak trees that surrounded the area, creating a soft whisper that seemed to carry the voices of all those who had been honored in this place. "Mom, do the soldiers under there have families?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah knelt down to her son's level, her heart aching at the innocence and depth of his question. "Yes, sweetheart. They had mothers and fathers, maybe brothers and sisters. Some might have had wives and children, but their families never got to say goodbye because no one knows who they are." This explanation seemed to hit Michael like a physical blow. His 8-year-old mind struggled to comprehend the tragedy of families never knowing what happened to their loved ones, of mothers waiting for sons who would never come home, of children growing up without fathers they would never remember. As the changing of the guard ceremony approached, the crowd began to grow larger. Visitors positioned themselves along the barriers, cameras ready to capture the solemn ritual. But Michael wasn't thinking about taking pictures. Something was building inside him, an emotion he couldn't quite name, but felt with overwhelming intensity. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of military precision and respect. The relief guard approached with measured steps, his uniform equally immaculate, his bearing equally proud. The two guards performed an intricate ritual of inspection, ensuring that every aspect of the relief guard's appearance met the exacting standards required for this sacred duty. The changing of the guard ceremony unfolded with breathtaking precision. Every movement was choreographed to perfection, each step carrying decades of tradition and honor. Michael watched as the relief guard, Corporal Anthony Martinez from Phoenix, Arizona, approached with the same measured cadence that had captivated the boy throughout the morning. The inspection process began, and Michael's eyes widened as he witnessed something extraordinary. The two guards examined each other's uniforms with microscopic attention to detail. Every button, every crease, every insignia was scrutinized. The relief guard's rifle was inspected with the same meticulous care, each component checked and verified before the weapon was deemed worthy of protecting the tomb. "Why do they check everything so carefully, Dad?" Michael whispered. "Because the unknown soldiers deserve perfection, son. These guards represent all of us, and they want to make sure they're honoring these heroes with the highest standards possible," David replied, his own military experience helping him appreciate the profound respect being demonstrated. As the ceremony continued, Michael noticed something that would stay with him forever. During the inspection, Sergeant Rodriguez's hands trembled almost imperceptibly. It wasn't from cold or nervousness, it was from the emotional weight of what he was doing. This wasn't just a job or a duty, it was a sacred trust that these young men carried with every fiber of their being. The crowd watched in reverent silence as the ceremony reached its climax. The guards performed their final movements with balletic grace, and then Sergeant Rodriguez began his march away from the tomb, his hour of duty complete. But as he walked past the gathered visitors, something unexpected happened. Michael suddenly broke away from his parents' grasp. Before David or Sarah could react, their 8-year-old son had ducked under the barrier rope and was walking directly toward the departing guard. Gasps arose from the crowd, and several security personnel began moving toward the boy. "Michael!" Sarah called out, her voice filled with panic and embarrassment. But what happened next left everyone speechless. Instead of running or causing a disruption, Michael stopped directly in front of Sergeant Rodriguez and did something that no one expected. The little boy stood at attention, his small frame mimicking the military posture he had been observing all morning, and slowly raised his right hand to his forehead in a perfect salute. The gesture was clumsy by military standards. His fingers weren't quite positioned correctly. His elbow was a bit too high, but the sincerity behind it was unmistakable. This wasn't a child playing soldier. This was a young boy offering the deepest respect he knew how to give. Sergeant Rodriguez stopped mid-stride. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the hardened soldier looked down at the small boy saluting him with such earnest respect. The guard's training had prepared him for many situations, but nothing had prepared him for this moment of pure, innocent honor. The crowd held its collective breath. Security personnel froze in place, unsure whether to intervene or allow this unprecedented moment to unfold. Even the new guard, Corporal Martinez, paused in his duties to witness what was happening. Then something beautiful occurred. Sergeant Rodriguez, this elite soldier who had maintained perfect composure through countless ceremonies, felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. But his training took over, and he did what his heart told him was right. He came to attention and returned Michael's salute with the same precision and respect he would show to any fellow service member. The salute lasted only a few seconds, but in that brief exchange, something profound passed between the young boy and the soldier. It was a moment of pure understanding, a bridge across generations, a recognition of sacrifice and service that transcended age and experience. When Michael finally lowered his hand, he looked up at Sergeant Rodriguez with eyes that seemed older than his 8 years. "Thank you for taking care of them," he said simply, his voice carrying across the silent plaza. Those 7 words hit Sergeant Rodriguez like a physical blow. In all his months of standing guard, through all the ceremonies and all the visitors, no one had ever thanked him quite like this. Adults had expressed appreciation, veterans had nodded their respect, but this child had cut straight to the heart of what the guards were really doing, taking care of fallen soldiers who could no longer take care of themselves. The soldier knelt down to Michael's level, his composure finally breaking. "Thank you, son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you'll ever know." As Sergeant Rodriguez knelt before Michael, the entire plaza seemed frozen in time. The other visitors, who had initially been concerned about the breach of protocol, now found themselves witnessing something far more significant than any ceremony they had come to see. Phones that had been raised to capture the changing of the guard were now recording this unexpected moment of pure human connection. David Thompson felt his own eyes welling up with tears as he watched his son. As a veteran, he understood the profound respect that Michael had just shown, but he also recognized that his 8-year-old boy had somehow grasped something that many adults never fully comprehend: the personal cost of military service and the importance of honoring those who pay it. Sarah quickly moved toward her son, apologizing profusely to the security personnel who had approached. "I'm so sorry, he's never done anything like this before. Michael, come back here right now." But one of the guards, Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams, gently placed her hand on Sarah's arm. "Mom, please, let them have this moment. In 20 years of working here, I've never seen anything quite like this." Meanwhile, news photographer Jake Morrison, who had been covering a routine assignment at Arlington, realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. His camera captured the moment when 2 very different Americans, one a seasoned soldier, the other an innocent child, connected over their shared respect for the fallen. The image would later become one of the most powerful photographs in the cemetery's history. Sergeant Rodriguez slowly stood up, his military bearing returning, but his eyes still glistening with emotion. He looked at David and Sarah, recognizing immediately that this was a military family. The way David stood, the respectful distance Sarah maintained, the obvious pride mixed with concern in their faces, it all spoke of people who understood military culture. "Your son has quite a heart," Rodriguez said to David, extending his hand. "I can tell he comes from a family that understands service." David shook the sergeant's hand firmly. "2 tours in Afghanistan," he said simply. "I brought him here because I wanted him to understand what sacrifice really means. I think he got the message." As the crowd began to disperse and normal operations resumed, something remarkable started happening. Other visitors who had witnessed Michael's gesture began approaching the Thompson family. An elderly woman named Dorothy Chen, whose husband had died in Korea, knelt down to thank Michael personally. "My Henry would have loved to see what you just did, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. A group of high school students from a nearby school, who had been somewhat disinterested in their field trip, suddenly found themselves asking their teacher more serious questions about military service and sacrifice. Michael's simple gesture had somehow made the abstract concept of honor tangible for them, but the most significant reaction came from an unexpected source. Colonel Robert Hayes, the commanding officer of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, had been conducting a routine inspection when he witnessed the entire exchange. A 30-year veteran with deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, Hayes had seen countless ceremonies and interactions at the tomb, but Michael's salute had affected him deeply. "Son," Colonel Hayes said, approaching Michael with the same respect he would show a fellow officer, "what you did today represents the very best of what we're trying to protect and preserve. Would you mind if I asked you a question?" Michael looked up at the colonel, still processing everything that had happened. "Yes, sir." "Why did you salute Sergeant Rodriguez?" Michael thought for a moment, his 8-year-old mind working to put complex feelings into words. "Because he was taking care of the soldiers who can't take care of themselves anymore. And because my dad taught me that when someone does something really important, you should show them respect." Colonel Hayes felt a lump forming in his throat. In all his years of military service, through all the briefings about mission and purpose, he had never heard the role of the tomb guards explained more perfectly or more simply. "Would you like to learn more about what we do here?" the colonel asked. What followed was an impromptu education that Michael would remember for the rest of his life. Colonel Hayes, along with Sergeant Rodriguez, who had delayed his departure, spent the next hour explaining the history of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, the significance of the guard duty, and the stories of some of the soldiers buried throughout Arlington. They told Michael about the unknown soldier from World War I, whose remains were selected from 4 unidentified American soldiers and brought to Arlington in 1921. They explained how the tomb had been expanded to include unknowns from World War II and the Korean War, and how advances in DNA technology had eventually allowed the Vietnam unknown to be identified and returned to his family. Michael listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions that surprised the adults around him. "Do the guards ever get scared standing out there alone at night?" he asked. "Sometimes," Sergeant Rodriguez admitted. "But we remember that we're not really alone. We're standing with every soldier who ever served, and we're being watched over by the ones we're guarding." As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across Arlington National Cemetery, the Thompson family prepared to leave, but the impact of Michael's gesture was just beginning to ripple outward. Jake Morrison, the photographer who had captured the moment, knew he had something special. When he returned to his newsroom that evening, his editor immediately recognized the power of the image. "This is front-page material," she said, studying the photograph of the young boy saluting the tomb guard. "This captures something we've all been trying to put into words." Within hours, the photograph was picked up by news outlets across the country. Social media exploded with shares and comments as people connected with the simple purity of Michael's gesture. Veterans from across America began sharing their own stories, inspired by the 8-year-old's demonstration of respect. But the real impact was happening in quieter, more personal ways. At dinner tables across the nation, parents found themselves having conversations with their children about service, sacrifice, and respect. Teachers incorporated Michael's story into their lessons about American history and civic responsibility. Back in Arlington, Colonel Hayes made a decision that would honor both Michael's gesture and the ongoing mission of the Tomb Guards. He arranged for a special ceremony to be held the following month, where Michael would be invited to participate in a wreath-laying ceremony at the tomb. "This young man reminded us all why we do what we do," Colonel Hayes explained to his staff. "Sometimes it takes the eyes of a child to help us see the true meaning of our mission." When the day of the ceremony arrived, Michael returned to Arlington with his family, but this time he wasn't just a visitor. Dressed in his best clothes, he walked alongside Colonel Hayes to the tomb, carrying a wreath that bore a simple inscription, "From a grateful nation's children." As Michael placed the wreath at the base of the tomb, Sergeant Rodriguez, who had requested to be part of the ceremony, stood at attention nearby. The same crowd of tourists and visitors watched, but this time they understood they were witnessing something that went beyond protocol and procedure. After the ceremony, Michael was presented with a special certificate recognizing his outstanding demonstration of respect and honor. But more importantly, he had sparked a conversation that would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling. In the months that followed, Arlington National Cemetery reported an increase in young visitors. Schools began organizing more field trips to the cemetery, and parents made special efforts to bring their children to witness the changing of the guard. Michael's simple salute had reminded an entire nation that respect and honor aren't just abstract concepts. They're living values that must be passed from one generation to the next. Sergeant Rodriguez, who completed his tour of duty at the tomb several months later, kept a copy of Jake Morrison's photograph on his desk. Whenever he faced challenges in his military career, he would look at the image and remember the 8-year-old boy who had understood, without any training or instruction, what it meant to honor those who serve. Years later, when Michael was asked about that day at Arlington, he would say simply, "I just wanted to say thank you. Sometimes that's all you can do, but it's important to do it." The photograph of Michael's salute became one of the most iconic images in Arlington National Cemetery's history, displayed in the visitor center as a reminder that respect knows no age, and that sometimes the most powerful gestures are the simplest ones. And in the quiet moments between ceremonies, when the tomb guards stand their solitary watch over America's unknown soldiers, they carry with them the memory of a little boy who understood that their vigil matters, that their service has meaning, and that somewhere in America, people still remember what it means to honor those who gave everything for their country. Michael Thompson's simple gesture had indeed left a nation in tears. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride, remembrance, and hope for the future.